Good afternoon. Welcome to today's discussion on the results of the recently held Indian state elections. For an outside observer, it almost feels like there is always an election happening in India. While this is partly true, this set of elections was arguably more consequential than usual. The four states, and due to time constraints, we are not looking at the Union Territory of Puducherry, that went to polls in April 2026, threw up contrasting results. While the Assam and Kerala election results were perhaps more predictable, the outcomes in Tamil Nadu and West Bengal were quite extraordinary. I'll leave the parsing of the electoral outcome to the distinguished panelists, but we'll just take a few minutes to give a quick recap of the results. In Assam, not only did the BJP-led National Democratic Alliance return to power, but it did so on an overwhelming mandate, winning 92 of the 126 seats in the assembly. The win was powered to a great extent by Chief Minister Hemanta Biswa Sarma, who has been a master strategist for the BJP, not just, of course, in Assam, but across the Northeast, ever since it defected from the Congress in 2015. He has also, of course, been a very polarizing figure. The main opposition party, the Congress, suffered a rout, with the state party chief Gaurav Gogoi losing his seat from Jorhat. The scale of BJP's victory was perhaps enhanced by a controversial delimitation that took place in 2023, and I assume we'll be talking a little bit about that later. In the politics of alternation that characterizes Kerala, the Left Democratic Front, or the LDF, had bucked the trend and won in 2021. However, in this election, the Congress-led United Democratic Front with UDF, which was seen to have an edge before the polling, won 97 of the 140 assembly seats compared to the LDF's 35. So it was a fairly comfortable victory. So though the UDF won comfortably, the choice of chief minister might prove to be more contentious. That's happening as we speak. The BJP, which had not won a single seat in 2021, made some gains and won 3 seats, up from 0 last time, and around 10% of the vote share. The Tamilaga Vetri Kazhagam and Vijay's performance in Tamil Nadu was nothing short of stunning. There is little precedent for a fledgling political outfit floated by someone who was an outsider to formal politics to form the government in its very first election. NTR in Andhra Pradesh comes to mind. Having won 107 seats, roughly 10 short of a majority in the 234-member Tamil Nadu Assembly, and 35% of the vote share, Vijay and the TVK are on the cusp of forming the government, although as we speak, that has run into some hurdles, and I'm sure Narayan will dwell a little bit on that. Vijay's electoral success has upended the political duopoly of the DMK and the AIDMK and the alteration of power between the two. The ruling DMK won 59 seats, down 74 from 2021, with outgoing Chief Minister M.K. Stalin himself losing from the Kolattur constituency. The AIDMK won 47 seats. The BJP, which fought the polls in alliance with the AIDMK, won only 1 seat. Finally, West Bengal, which was a prize that the BJP had been eyeing since 2014, though few had anticipated a landslide victory for the party. The BJP won 207 of the 294 assembly seats and a vote share of 46%, reducing the Trinamool Congress to 80 seats and 41% of the vote share. It was a near reversal, actually, of the 2021 election, where the BJP had won 77 seats and the TMC 215. The historic nature of the BJP's win in Bengal can be gauged from the fact that political change in the state occurs at fairly long intervals. And this is the first time that in nearly 50 years that the ruling party at the center has been able to win in Bengal. Of course, this is the first time that the BJP has also been able to form the government in Bengal. Looking at the bigger picture, the elections have not only resulted in the BJP attaining its long-term goal of winning West Bengal, but also taking control of eastern India in addition to most of northern and western states. The LDF's loss in Kerala means that for the first time in India, there is not a single state being governed by the left parties. The results in West Bengal and Tamil Nadu were, of course, a blow to established regional parties and a further sign of political centralization, which is likely to have adverse effects on India's federal structure. The outcome in West Bengal was also evidence of massive Hindu consolidation behind the BJP, again, something I assume which Nilanjan will talk about. And this consolidation has happened, of course, outside the party's traditional areas of dominance. The sign of four is, of course, one of the better-known Sherlock Holmes mysteries. I'll turn the floor over to the excellent set of panelists, all of whom have extensive knowledge of the states that we will be discussing today, to play the role of homes in deciphering the electoral verdicts. We'll change the batting order a little bit, with no disrespect, of course, to Assam or Kerala, and request Narayan to open the discussion, followed by Nilanjan, Sangeeta, and Radhakrishnan. Each panelist can speak for around 10 to 12 minutes, give or take a few minutes, followed by a discussion. The audience can send in their questions in the chat box. Over to Narayan. The audience has the bios of the speakers, so I won't run over them again. Narayan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ranajay, and thank you to ISAS NUS for organizing this. This is obviously an important moment in India, especially for Indian federalism, because especially in the context of Tamil Nadu and West Bengal, you're looking at states that have been dominated by regional parties, parties with a dissenting voice from what's happening in Delhi and from the mainstream, and important I don't want to say battles, but important contests for a share of resources, a voice in how the country is governed, how states are governed, state autonomy questions. All of these have been up for grabs and have been a tussle between these states and the center for a number of years. So what happens in them, both in terms of whether the BJP is able to find a presence and even win some states, as in the case of West Bengal, and in terms of which regional formations decide to play ball with the BJP in the future, whether they bring them on board as partners and so on. All of that impacts everyone living in the country, and by extension, how India relates to the rest of the world as well, and provokes deep questions and provides some answers to what makes democracy work in such a pluralist and diversified context. So with that very general look at what this election means for all of us, let me delve into what happened in Tamil Nadu and sort of the long path which brought us to this rather surprising election result that we saw on May 4th. So I think Ranajay quite neatly summarized the basic results, which is that the newcomer Tamilnaga Vetri Karagam TVK, headed by C. Joseph Vijay, the Tamil superstar actor, 51 years old, young in the scheme of things as far as politicians go, has upended the batting order in a sense and has made a dramatic entry, his first time contesting an election. Dramatic in the sense of bringing, not to an end perhaps, but breaking the continuous almost 60-year run of the incumbent DMK and the previous incumbent AIA DMK, which have virtually been in power, alternating with each other since 1967, when they, on the backs of the Dravidian movement, toppled the erstwhile government of the Congress party. And the echoes of this, partial defeat is what I'll call it, because the TVK has not, while it's the single largest party at 108 out of 234 seats in the state assembly, it has not reached the 118 seat critical halfway point to form a government. And therein, there is still an open question about whether, under other machinations, I don't want to use the word horse trading, but let's say negotiations between other parties, a different power arrangement might yet come to rule this state or govern the state going forward. And we'll come to that. But before we get into the present moment, let's stay with the question of context and what brought us here. So as I mentioned, the TVK was a newcomer, and its win actually signals a break of sorts with convention, if you will, for 59 years. And that lengthy period of rule by these two parties, which are called the Dravidian majors, because they heralded the Dravidian movement, which began in the early part of the 20th century, is because they actually stood for a distinct set of values and ideals, which was again born of post-colonial Brahmin and generally upper caste dominance of state institutions, of jobs in both the public sector and in some private sector organizations, in universities and beyond. And so the Dravidian movement came to speak for values such as state autonomy, because it was also about breaking away from the diktats of a distant or remote New Delhi, passing laws that were not entirely acceptable to the regionally ambitious leaders, political leaders you found in Tamil Nadu, to freedom from Hindi imposition as one of those sort of goals within that broad category. And of course, on the flip side, adopted to a very great extent a monumental edifice, in fact, of welfare policies, including the likes of the noon meal scheme, direct benefit transfers to vulnerable group, and generally the provision of a social security net that has become the mainstay of agenda setting for the, as I said, the best part of 60 years. And while that is obviously the positive side of this Dravidian movement project, it would be remiss not to mention that the flip side of this upliftment campaign, as it were, of the common man and woman and child in the state, also came with the dominance of charismatic, power centralizing leaders, chief ministers and their cabinets, who held power very close to their chests. And under their aegis, there was what I've described as a dubious substructure of a shadow economy, virtually, that flourished, that thrived, that was manifested in the complete throttling control of sectors such as liquor, all the way to real estate. And of course, as I said, under the shadow of black economy or shell company context, control of a wide range of private corporations as well, that yielded a rich lucre of profits, some of it accounted, but most of it not, to these leaders, to the point where one of the former leaders, Jayalalitha, who is no more, who passed away in 2016, and several others who owned assets abroad, outside of the country, of an eye-watering scale. And even in this era of interstate competition for economic and investment benefits, such as getting large corporations to set up factories and plants in Tamil Nadu, it was difficult for business leaders to even get appointments with some of these political honchos unless they, provided the, I will say, necessary lubrication to these negotiations in cash terms to get the licenses and land permits required. Similarly, diplomats and other dignitaries have struggled in past years to even, penetrate this veil of soft authoritarianism to even get an appointment or a meeting to speak to these chief ministers. However, the interesting shift that happened after, I'm going to move very quickly from 1967 all the way to the early or mid 2010s, a very big leap, is when Jayalalitha and Karunanidhi respectively left the scene in 2016 and 2018 when they passed on. The Dravidian movement, through the other numerous adaptations and accommodations that it had implemented or sort of organically incorporated into itself over the years, went through the largest shift, which is the move from personality-based politics to what I call performative politics and governance record-based accountability of leaders. So you saw, of course, in the immediate aftermath of Jayalalitha's passing in 2016, the AIADMK's nominee, as it were, Edapadi Palaniswamy, rise to the chief ministerial seat. And he actually proved himself to be an able administrator. He saw the state through numerous crises, whether it was relating to, demanding a greater share of resources from the center in the context of tax revenue sharing, or in the context of COVID or other disaster relief funds. He actually provided good governance to the state for several years. But in the case of the AIADMK, Jayalalitha was such a centralizing and autocratic leader in a sense that she had deliberately degraded 3 to 4 rungs of leadership beneath her, not allowing the green shoots of new leadership, which could possibly provide continuity of the leadership model of that party to thrive, to survive. And as a result, in the aftermath of her rule, there was a considerable amount of infighting, factionalism, lawsuits, disputes over which faction would get the two-leaf symbol of the party. And that led to, of course, some splintering as well, where Sasikala, Jayalalitha's former confidant, split with and formed her own party, or her family members formed the AMMK, which is a separate wing. And similarly, O. Paneerselvam, who was again actually one of Jayalalitha's favored candidates, and briefly sat in the chief ministerial seat as well, got into a very bitter dispute with Edappadi Palaniswamy, and they split. And now, ironically, he moved to the DMK, the arch rival. And so there's been a lot of sort of challenges to the cohesive core of the cadre base of the AIADMK, and that has been its weakness, despite having an able administrator at the top. In the case of the DMK, which won the state assembly election in 2021, there was a far more orderly succession plan from the time that the previous doyen of the Dravidian movement, M. Karunanidhi, passed on. All of the cadres of that party firmly threw themselves behind supporting M.K. Stalin, the son of M. Karunanidhi. And while that party therefore had a coherent institutional basis and did not experience the sort of internal frictions that the AIADMK did, there has been a subsequent leadership question in terms of Stalin's son Udayanidhi, and questions raised about whether his style of governing, or whether his the number of years of experience that he had or did not have governing would end up being an obstacle to his taking on the mantle of the party after his father's stepping down. Of course, his father had not stepped down, but in a shocking twist, M.K. Stalin himself lost his seat in Kolattur, a constituency of the Chennai area where he had invested heavily, spent much of his time as chief minister walking through, connecting with the residents, and really developing that constituency. And so that again brings us to the question of why, including in such constituencies, but in fact across the state, the TVK, a newcomer to this entire scenario in the sense of not being associated with the Dravidian movement, but its leader, perhaps Vijay, perhaps articulating some of the core principles of Dravidianism, primarily in the field of mass welfare policies, and also making certain remarks about rooting out corruption, although one can legitimately ask about the extent to which that could be implemented across institutions in such a deeply corrupt state. How did such a party actually succeed in getting 34.92% of the popular vote? And more than that, many of us as observers, and for example, in the case of all our reporters in the Hindu, we had a very clear sense that Vijay was going to perform extremely well in urban centers and urban metros because of two things. One is that his films did very well and they were widely viewed across these areas. And secondly, he adopted a viral sort of a social media marketing strategy. He was also consulted briefly with Prashant Kishore, the man who has promoted such strategies across numerous parties with great success. And that was seen as a means to reach out to the young generation, the youth voters, and surprisingly to women across all ages and different income backgrounds, who flocked to Vijay and ended up doing so in a surprise to some of us observers too, across the state. So Vijay's vote actually penetrated caste strongholds belonging to the AIADMK in Western Tamil Nadu, to the PMK in Northern Tamil Nadu, to the DMK in some parts of Central and Southeastern Tamil Nadu. And so in that sense, there was what you could call a surge effect. And that age-old question of how do film stars manage that transition from the silver screen to political mobilization, that is, convert their fan clubs and mandrams into actual mobilization vehicles on the ground during election time, that has been answered by Vijay, although it is still unclear as to what magic sauce or X factor he had that he brought into play, which gave them that boost. So while we're still studying those results, what has left the state in a bit of a quandary is the fact, again, that he has, while being the single largest party, has not yet been able to provide letters of support to the governor, Mr. Arlekar, demonstrating that he can move from 107, because he himself contested in 2 seats, that is Vijay, and has to give up 1, from 107 to 118. While the Congress party, formerly aligned with the DMK alliance, has now moved over to Vijay and brings 5 seats with it, it still leaves him a number of seats short, and there is no clarity that he will cross that critical halfway mark. And so, meanwhile, of course, this is still very much, hearsay on the ground. We are hearing, and it's in today's news as well, that discussions remarkably have occurred between the DMK and the AIADMK as well, the arch rivals of 60 years. And if they ever came together, that would also be breaking with history, for they have been bitter rivals throughout and never sat together in government, whether with internal, like sharing the seat of power or even from outside support. So the fact that, rather the possibility that they could come together to keep out Vijay and to keep out the single largest party would be, again, a remarkable twist in the tail, and that will be known possibly over the coming weeks. So I think I'll leave it there. There's many more questions related to unpack, which are more proximate to the election as well as more relating to the broader arc of Dravidian politics, and I'll leave that to the Q&A. But thank you.
Thank you, Narayan, for that broad overview, as well as describing the current state of play and the extraordinary proposal of the AIADMK and the DMK, even thinking of tying up, which sort of throws past history out of the window. We'll come back to some of these questions, and I should have actually at least given a brief introduction of Narayan. Narayan is the opinion editor and senior associate editor of The Hindu, and also non-resident senior fellow at ISAS. Our next speaker is Dr. Nilanjan Sarkar, who's an associate professor at Ahmedabad University, India, and he'll be talking about the West Bengal verdict. Nilanjan?
So first of all, thank you for having me. You can all hear me clearly, hopefully. I think, a lot has already been spoken about and written about the West Bengal elections. I know that we have a more general audience, and we also have some people who probably have some detailed information. I thought what I would do, sort of mix it up a little bit, is to, of course, give an overview of what has happened in West Bengal, how we think about the trends in West Bengal's politics with respect to the rest of India, an empirical characterization of what has happened, and maybe a couple of big ideas that can help us think about the relevance of this election for Indian politics more generally, for the democratic health of the country more generally, because I think, getting some big ideas out might be helpful. Okay, so let me sort of start with a caveat, right, which is that our tendency when we analyze elections, and I am as guilty as everyone else, is to not look at any other factors rather than sort of standard state of play, political preferences, citizens, anti-incumbency, this party, that party. No discussion of the election in West Bengal will make sense unless we talk about the role that state institutions played in this election, right? And so we know that we had an extraordinary amount of action from state institutions that fundamentally altered the way in which this election was fought. So I'm just going to go over 2 or 3 things. So the first is what was called the Special Intensive Review of Electoral Rolls, the SIR. Now, the SIR had 2 components. It had a sort of a standard cleanup of rolls, which, you sort of people who've moved, people who've passed away, this should be cleaned up. At that stage, something extraordinary was done in that the list of documents that would be allowed was rapidly shrunk, changed on the ground in a way that was at times haphazard. And so certain people who, are very much present and are very much citizens found themselves off the list. The second step, which is seen as the more controversial step in SIR, is what was called, removing people from the rolls due to a logical discrepancy or looking for discrepancies. Now, there are a set of listed discrepancies family sizes above a certain number, age differences that look too small or too large between members. What I would say is that while there are things that are written down, on the ground, there seems to be a lot more murkiness as to how some of these rules were applied or not applied. And the third sort of, the second aspect of state intervention is that we saw a very large number of paramilitary central forces that were involved in this election. And so that also fundamentally changes the ways in which politics is conducted. Okay, so with that sort of introduction as to how this election was different, let's sort of have a more general discussion of what we've seen in the state of West Bengal. And I know that there might be some more specific questions. I'm happy to get into them in Q&A. So first, some initial color on what we have, the received wisdom on the politics in West Bengal. It has been known for a very long time that the politics of West Bengal turns on ground presence, the local power of a political organization or a political party. This is something that we associate with the introduction of the left, the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and its allies in the 1970s onward, where political control was really achieved through control of the village councils, the panchayats, right? And we know that what local control means is a certain level of responsiveness, which is a positive story, but a certain level of intimidation, violence, and aggression that local party cadres, that local party workers engage in, which is a negative story. When the Trinamool Congress came to power in 2011, they inherited many of these features of West Bengal's politics, right? The local domination characteristics, the need to control a local cadre. But unlike the organization that the left parties had, CPM had, what Doipan Bhattacharya has called a party society, the TMC relied on bringing together several strong factions, right, who may or may not have initially been committed to the party, and sort of keeping them happy or playing them off of each other, which Doipan Bhattacharya has also called the franchisee model of politics, right? So this is sort of a change that has happened. Now, 5 years ago, the TMC was already facing a lot of anti-incumbency in 2021. But as Ronojoy has told us, right, that it is still an election in which the TMC won 215 out of 294 seats. And the explanation that most people give, and I also agree with, is that the sheer presence of the TMC on the ground to be able to send the message of its leader to the citizens, to be able to mobilize and manage politics was unparalleled, and certainly the BJP offered no competition. So the BJP coming into 2026 faced an obvious structural challenge that it didn't have this number of party workers or the strength of a party cadre on the ground that would challenge the strength of the TMC on the ground. The second challenge, which is well documented, is that the BJP had a demographics problem, and we'll hear a little bit more about this probably when we talk about Assam, right? So according to the 2011 census, there are the 27% of the population of West Bengal is Muslim. Anywhere between 25 and 30% you might consider to be Muslim. In the state, it's the second highest Muslim population for a state in India behind Assam. And what it means is that without achieving a significant amount of polarization, by which we mean a very, very high percentage of Hindus voting for Hindu nationalist BJP, it would be very, very difficult for the TMC to win. The second aspect of this is that Mamata Banerjee was also a powerful leader in descriptive terms, by which I mean that she was seen as a female leader par excellence, right? So she promoted females within the party. She delivered welfare benefits that were tinged on questions of gender. And so there was an overall imagination of the TMC's coalition consisting of non-Hindus, largely Muslims, and women who were responsive to the descriptive politics of Mamata Banerjee and her welfare. Okay. So I'm going to just very quickly go over this map. And this is the map that was actually printed in the Hindustan Times the day after the election. So you see the number says 206. It has now changed to 207, and TMC has now changed to 80. But everything else in this map is correct, and there's a lot of information here. So I thought it would be a nice sort of image to put up on the screen. Everyone is able to see this. I'm hoping. Yeah, yeah. So what you see is that the BJP had lost the last election by double-digit percentage points, and this time they surged by 7 to 8 percentage points and have nearly 46% vote share. The TMC came down from about 48% to 41% vote share, so a huge shift in political fortunes. And you can see what happened on the map. On the right is what the map looked like in 2021, and on the left is what the map looks like in 2026. The green are seats that are won by the TMC, and the saffron or orange are seats that are won by the BJP. And so I'm going to just very quickly talk about some of the regional aspects and the sort of the story, at least from the data, and then come back to what it tells us about the election. So what we knew about the BJP is that, and if we had looked back one earlier election in 2019, the strongholds for the BJP were the western part of the state, where you see just a little bit of orange and saffron in 2021, and the northern part of the state, of what we call Upper Bengal, where you can see that even in 2021, even in a weak election, the BJP had performed very well. You see some elements in the middle of the state, and then you see this funny cluster of orange and saffron right next to the Bangladesh border. This is a population that it's actually a peri-urban population. People mistake it as being a rural population. It's not. But it has a large proportion of scheduled castes coming from the Namashuddha community, who traditionally have come from Bangladesh and had experienced a lot of violence in Bangladesh, came over to this side of the border. And there is an old dynamic of Hindu-Muslim polarization in these regions. And it is something that it is a voter base the BJP has cultivated for a while. So these are the regions where the BJP already had quite a bit of following. We knew that TMC would perform worse this time. So the idea that in the upper part of the state or the western part of the state, which borders Jharkhand, has a large tribal population where the RSS has been doing a lot of work, or even the region that's directly bordering Bangladesh, the fact that the BJP performed well in those places is less surprising. Right? What is more surprising is the stronghold of the TMC had been Greater Kolkata. So if we look, so we see on the right, it's a little bit easier to see, sort of a dense cluster of seats right in the center. That's Calcutta, and everything emanating around it is Greater Calcutta. And these are areas where the TMC had been winning election after election after election. They had much stronger ground force. They had a ground connect. And so people thought it would be very, very difficult for the BJP to breach these areas. And without breaching these areas, the BJP would have had a hard time reaching the majority mark. When we look to the left and we look at the 2026 map, you see that all around Calcutta, the BJP has been able to win, and some of those very dense seats, as you enter within to Calcutta, the BJP has also won. The TMC has been able to hold serve in some of the more rural areas around Calcutta. But the moment that the seat got a bit more urban or even peri-urban, the BJP has jumped ahead. So what we can say empirically, and what we now know, is that huge urban-rural divides emerged in the electorate. The urban areas and the peri-urban areas went disproportionately towards the BJP, and these are also areas that showed extraordinarily high levels of Hindu-Muslim polarization. One quick caveat about West Bengal. Unlike most states in India, the Muslim population in West Bengal is disproportionately rural, not urban, because one of the effects of partition is that the middle-class Muslim population went to Bangladesh. So urban and peri-urban seats are disproportionately Hindu compared to the rest of the state, and they saw extraordinary levels of polarization, frustration, anti-incumbency with the TMC. And this dynamic of large Hindu-Muslim polarization and urbanity seems to have driven these electoral results. Okay, I'm just going to finish up in about 2-3 minutes. I know that I'm sort of short on time here. So let me just see if I can find my notes here real fast. Okay, so a couple of quick points to talk about. So what happened to the TMC? So certainly there was anti-incumbency. There's this idea that people have been talking about the welfare as the floor, which is to say that Mamata Banerjee had built her bona fides on welfare delivery, but most people on the ground said that's great, but now what? You can't just simply win us over with, a little bit of welfare delivery. What other kinds of delivery will exist? One major story that is emerging for the TMC is that there had been the use of IPAC, which we've already talked about, an Uber consultancy for the central command, Mamata Banerjee and her nephew Abhishek Banerjee, to manage politics on the ground, to develop a direct link between the citizen and the leader at the top. A lot of what was designed on the ground and the way in which the central command communicated with the citizen was through the consultancy and not through its traditional party network. And so it built this parallel structure within the party to reach the citizen. And so the citizen also viewed IPAC as an extension of the party and a parallel structure. Now, what that means is this local party dynamic, which I started the talk with, the local democratic accountability linked to your local party worker is now broken, because that's actually not how you reach the high command. The local party worker now is only there for corruption, cut money, violence, and that generates a huge amount of anti-incumbency. The second story, and this is something that's very natural for those of us who study South Asia, because we've read Paul Brass, we've studied, communal violence across all of South Asia. One of the complicated stories about what happened with SIR is that you would have a Hindu and a Muslim village side by side. The Muslim village would see many, many more deletions from the electoral roll than the Hindu village. But why those deletions had taken place, nobody could say, right? As I said, the discrepancy story was applied haphazardly in a murky way. Nobody really knows what happened. And that led to a lot of rumor. So in the Hindu village, they would say, why did the Muslim get struck off? Is he illegal? Are there too many kids? Are there illegal documents? This ability of rumor to transform society, which so many of us know from the study of communal violence and communal polarization, is something that was very, very evident on the ground in West Bengal. Right? And the final thing that I want to sort of talk about, the BJP had this weak organizational problem. The use of state agencies like the paramilitary and other government officials to substitute for the government's cadre was very obvious, right? So at least in the minds of the voter, the paramilitary, the CAPF, the CRPF were seen as an extension of the BJP government. And to sort of further that notion, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of electoral violence after the BJP won. And a lot of people have said that, the paramilitary are not taking action against the BJP cadres the way that they had against the TMC cadres. And so this sort of leads to 3 or 4 big questions, and then I'll end. One, this urban frustration story is not just about West Bengal. We see TVK coming up in Tamil Nadu. We see, urban frustration. Remember, the Kerala is also a very urban state. We're seeing a certain kind of frustration from growing social and income inequalities in India. A desire to overturn the existing political order, what political scientists call anti-system politics or anti-system parties. The BJP has actually been able to hook into some of these frustrations through Hindu nationalism, but in other places it hasn't, right? The other major difference that we're seeing, if you look at all of the reporting on the ground, very few people are mentioning Narendra Modi or Modi factor this time. We're seeing a lot more of the election about being the management of elections through state institutions. And so we're coming to a democracy or a version of democracy where the state institutions and central institutions, we'll talk about Assam and what was done to the limitation in a second, where the management of elections through state institutions is going to become an important deciding factor. And as we look ahead to 2029 and future politics, this question of these managed elections and what role state institutions play in electoral politics is going to become a larger question in almost every election we're going to analyze from here on forward. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Again, it's a complex terrain that you were trying to cover in a short time, but you did a very good job. We'll come back, of course, to some of these questions, including the impact of the SIR, polarization, etc., hopefully during the Q&A. So our next speaker is Sangeeta Barua Pesharuti, and she was the former National Affairs Editor of The Wire in India. And she'll, of course, look at the election result in Assam. Sangeeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. Very informative presentations by Narayan and Nilanjan. And of course, a neat foregrounding of the topic by Rana Joy. But let me draw from Nilanjan here to start dissecting these elections by holding up a larger point here. The manner the recent state elections in India was held was quite significant for me as a political observer after a very long time. This to me stood out as the real turning point of regime change in India, a change of gear, clearly, loudly, sharply. Let me tell you why. The way the electoral battlefield was seen to be readied calculatively in my home state Assam, also in neighboring Bengal, it was pretty clear to election watchers that the move was to ensure a massive win for the party in power in New Delhi, the BJP. Let me be very categorical here. The win in Assam, particularly in Bengal, couldn't have been pulled off by the party by dint of just holding power at the center. It would have needed to actively collude with two of the institutions that are supposed to be gatekeepers, that are to protect the constitution and the democracy in India, which entails that citizens and their rights are supreme. The job of these two institutions is not to help a political party win an election, but they were seen for all practical purposes in the run-up to these elections doing exactly so. I'm talking about the Supreme Court of India and the Election Commission of India here. Why I call it a turning point for a regime change is because it is in the run-up to this set of state elections that we saw this collusion of institutions that are to work only in the interest of the nation and its citizens, but coming across as choosing a political party, and thereby a particular politically aligned path like never before. So therefore, my submission is it must be for a greater purpose. And what greater purpose are we talking about here than a clearer path for establishing a Hindu nation? I have always been saying this and wrote it in my first book in 2019 too, that we have been hearing of the Gujarat model nationally since the rise of Modi in 2013-14. But what we as political observers need to study very closely if we need to understand the Modi era BJP and its ideological designs on the country is the Assam model actually. I say it must be done even actually to understand better the effects of emergency on our politics. A direct fallout of emergency was the anti-foreigner movement in Assam, a state that borders Bangladesh, and that movement gave birth to the concept of what we are hearing now, weeding out foreigners from the electoral rolls. What was tried out by the BJP in Bengal prior to these elections were active collusion of the Election Commission of India, the special intensive revision about which Nilanjan had spoken about quite in detail, to drop 91 lakh voters from that state's electoral list, and ignored also the appeal against it by as many as 27 lakh voters in spite of an assurance given by the country's highest court, the Supreme Court of India, to hear them, is a model already tested successfully in Assam. In 2019, I want to remind people here that in 2019, under the watch of the Supreme Court, 19.06 lakh voters of Assam were kept out of the electoral list through an update process of the National Register of Citizens, or NRC, in that northeastern border state by doubting their citizenship and therefore their voting rights. Though they were told then also officially that they can appeal against it, the process has barely begun in Assam. So it's a similar case that we see unrolling in Bengal now. Those 27 lakhs kept out in Bengal are, of course, a mixed population of Hindus and Muslims. In Assam and maybe like Bangalore, in Bengal also, maybe there may be more Bengali, Muslims and then Bengali Hindus. But in Assam, there are more Bengali Hindus than Muslims. I see the amended Citizenship Act brought by the Modi government in 2019 to play an active role now, to bring back the Hindu Bengalis to the electoral list, both in BJP-ruled Assam and Bengal. But the Muslims would likely have to go through a system where odds would be high against them. So the way those tribunals to hear the appeals were designed by the Supreme Court for Bengal prior to these elections is no different from the Assam model. As many as 100 foreigners tribunals exist in Assam to hear appeals of suspected non-citizens. Those suspected foreigners were created out of Assam's electoral rolls. Let's not forget that. For the first time, the Election Commission had created a new category of voters in India then for Assam. It's called D or doubtful or dubious voters. So prior to the recent elections in Bengal, we saw a replication of that Assam model. Also, mind you, that circular of Ministry of Home Affairs of Government of India to set up foreigners tribunals were not meant for Assam alone. Its mandate is nationwide. So anytime such a foreigners tribunal can be set up in any state by the center. So we saw a peep of that reality this time in Bengal. So prior to these elections, we saw Assam undergoing the delimitation process along with Jammu and Kashmir. This was the first election in Assam after that process was completed by the Election Commission. And the delimitation exercise was carried out in Assam based on the 2001 census data, old data. No assembly seats were increased there after delimitation, but all the 126 constituencies were redesigned in such a manner that they seem to align to the BJP's communal politics and perhaps help it fester. Something that we call gerrymandering, but we saw it happen in Assam. Why I'm highlighting it is also because a direct fallout of the delimitation exercise was seen in the Assam results this time, the reduction of Muslim-dominated seats in Assam. Prior to delimitation, there were 32 Muslim-dominated constituencies in Assam, but it has now been reduced to 20. So in these elections, we saw Congress winning 20 seats in Assam, 19 of which were in the Muslim-dominated seats, which has helped BJP to, of course, amplify its propaganda that Congress is a Muslim party. We see the same narrative of the BJP in Bengal. TMC wins only with the help of the Muslim votes. In Bengal, we saw the BJP hoisting up that narrative to push a communal campaign against TMC, which led to the consolidation of the Hindu votes in the Bengal elections. To my mind, this is a paradigm shift. In Bengal, caste and religion have barely played a decisive role in elections. The reason it took BJP perhaps so long to grab power in that state. Of course, there was anti-incumbency in Bengal, so also in Tamil Nadu and Kerala against the ruling parties. But my question is, if that's the driving force, it should have reflected somewhat in the results of Assam too, against a 10-year-old government. But we tend to increasingly notice that anti-incumbency seems to be a mover only in a non-BJP ruled state. So as a political observer, I have been asking myself, why so? Is there something that we are missing there? Are those states really surging ahead than the opposition ruled states? Well, data don't quite support such a scenario. So the way the Election Commission's top leadership was seen in these particular elections, so blatantly projecting the institution to be having its own party, is making me ask, is there more to it behind the crumbling of governments in opposition ruled states? Why only BJP has a duck back when it comes to anti-incumbency? I'm asking this question because I have traveled through poll-bound Assam quite a bit, particularly in Upper Assam, where most of the 126 assembly constituencies are. And I sensed undercurrents, not necessarily against the BJP, but certainly against the chief minister. His communal rhetoric, corruption allegations against his immediate family, his high-handed leadership, angst within the BJP for ignoring the old BJP leaders and filling up the party MLA list with former colleagues brought from the Congress, etc. But I saw zero reflection of it in the results. Why I highlight this is because in 2016, when the BJP first came into Assam, I saw the demand for change or poriborton on the ground in Assam. Anti-incumbency against an otherwise a Congress chief minister, not quite disliked, Tarun Gogoi, but they wanted a change. And it reflected in the results. Why not anymore is the question on top of my mind now. I agree that Himanta Biswa Sarma is a good election manager, but I think we are giving him more credit than he deserves. We saw his restlessness towards the end when the Congress tried shifting the narrative back to allegations of corruption of his family. We saw him activating the Assam police, even though model code of conduct was in effect. A party of Assam police had arrived at a particular Congress leader's house to arrest him and things like that. So we can talk more about Assam, of course, during the discussion if needed, particularly what happened to the sub-nationalist or Jatiyotawadi politics. Thus far, an important part of Assam politics, like the Dravidian cause in Tamil Nadu, which Narayan was highlighting. An important aspect of these state elections to me is also where is the trajectory of sub-nationalist politics in states heading? Because there is all BJP's politics is about one nation, everything one. So this diversity is brought mostly by the sub-nationalist politics. So I've been watching that too. Are new players entering these sub-nationalist political arenas while there is voter fatigue perhaps around the old players? So I agree that cash transfers through government schemes to women in Assam had helped the BJP to win votes. But a large section of women are not part of its beneficiary politics yet. As per government's own data, nearly 40 lakh women in Assam have benefited from the flagship Orunodoi scheme. They were also given later 9,000 bucks, then 19,000 transfers, and like that just before the elections. But women voters in Assam, if you look at it, the overall number are over 1.2 crore voters. So that means they have not even reached the halfway mark. And also, I'm also now looking more and more, I'm actually thinking whether the real Gujarat model is designed to ensure a single party rule in a state. It's not that Gujarat doesn't have extreme poverty, malnutrition, anti-incumbency factor, etc. But why does it not reflect in election results like it didn't in Assam this time? Is something we as students, I think, of students of politics must ponder about. And let me quickly go back to the delimitation exercise in Assam just to highlight that the southern states have been opposing the Modi government's move to increase parliamentary seats through fresh delimitation because they would likely have less seats as it is based on population figures, and therefore they will have less heft in parliament in spite of contributing hugely to the India growth story. Their population, of course, is no match to underdeveloped Uttar Pradesh or Bihar. So I'm now asking myself, is the delimitation exercise in Assam to be a model tool for the Chief Election Commissioner Gyanesh Kumar to assure the southern states that the number of seats won't be changed, while also ensuring an electoral advantage to the ruling BJP like it did in Assam by carving out quite a few parliamentary constituencies, perhaps on religious lines? So it's a question on top of my mind at the moment. And before I stop, I just want to also state that at a time when it was so obvious how the Supreme Court and the Election Commission of India acted in the run-up to these state elections, the opposition should have united, not so much to contest an election, which seemed a fixed match in favor of one party, but to boycott it altogether. Come to the streets, talk to the people what dangers such a collision can pose to the nation, to democracy, and therefore ignite perhaps a movement for electoral reforms to strengthen the roots of the world's largest democracy. I ask now, what happened to their Kagaj Nahi Dikhayenge, or we will not show our documents movement, which was led by Mamata? I think it was a truly unique opportunity lost for opposition. They may be forced to do it now, but it should have been done before losing an election. Because after you lose, it is easy to project you as only a poor loser. Mamata Banerjee is refusing to resign from her post, but she can easily be portrayed now to the public as a poor loser and not accepting people's mandate. But she has had that strong image of a street fighter. To my mind, she was the only one who would have challenged Modi in his game, but these election results have certainly diminished that aura of her. I strongly feel that these elections have also ensured that there is no opposition bloc anymore, or what has been named as India bloc. It's effectively dead now, simply because two of its street fighters, Mamata and Arvind Kejriwal of Aam Aadmi Party, have been neutralized through electoral defeats. So also two other strongest poles, M.K. Stalin in Tamil Nadu and Pinarayi Vijayan in Kerala. So therefore, I reiterate that the ground for a turning point to ensure a real regime change in India is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta, for that illuminating as well as provocative talk, and the interesting Assam model that you talked about, which people don't really speak or write about that. I think we can come back to those issues hopefully. And finally, we turn to Mr. Radhakrishnan, who's been waiting patiently. Of course, a veteran journalist. His last designation was as the former editor of the Asia Net News. Mr. Radhakrishnan, the floor is yours. I think you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah, please.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Ronojoy Sen, for having this discussion as well as having me in this. And as everyone said, this is a turning point this is a sort of watershed election in its history in various ways. And definitely, this shows that the three prominent members of the opposition, three more prominent leaders of the opposition, have been defeated. Almost, not just defeated, but routed as such. And so this is a blow to federalism, democracy, secularism, and generally the idea of India. But at the same time, these outcomes actually serve a cautionary tale for all the three to sort of to practice what you preach, because this very clearly says that unless you keep your own house in order, you are not likely to go ahead in your fight for democracy or fight for secularism or federalism against the Modi government. So it's very clear that these leaders and these, the parties or the governments that they represented were having problems in their respective states. So this is clearly almost the end of the India alliance, the opposition alliance, until and unless a new turn comes. Maybe this will throw up a completely new idea. Now, counter outcome as such, let me state the kind of some of the historical aspects of this particular result. Is that one, as Ronojoy said in the beginning, that this marks the emergence of, at least for the time being, a communist Mukt India, and so there is no state where the communists are in power, and this has happened for the first time in the last half a century, 50 years at least, after 1977. And that it has happened at a time when the Indian Communist Party has entered its centenary phase also assumes a historical gravitas. And thirdly, it is specific to Kerala. Kerala was the first state in India in 1957 to elevate the communists to power through ballot. And now Kerala becomes the last state where the red flag has been lowered. And it was the first to elevate and the last to extinguish, at least for the time being. And there's another journalistic interesting highlight, which is about the village of Pinarai. Pinarai is a village in Kannur, where the Communist Party, the Kerala Communist Party, was born in 1939. And it so happens that the unraveling of the Communist Party in Kerala has happened under the watch of Pinarai's most famous son, who is none else but Pinarayi Vijayan. And fifth historic aspect is related to BJP's emergence as a major third axis in Kerala's hitherto bipolar politics, as a major strategic disruptor of bipolar politics. And also for the first time, it has won 3 seats, which is remarkable, given the fact that Kerala state had remained almost inaccessible to BJP ever since it was formed. And so let me now come to the details of this debacle. That is, one, it is the worst left defeat in 50 years. And the LDF was born in 1982, and the worst defeat until this for the LDF happened in 2001, when it hit the nadir of 41 seats. Now it has been reduced to 35 seats, which has never happened before. And for the first time in history, the left votes have gone beneath 40%. This also has not happened before. And the second important detail of the debacle is that, even when this left LDF had suffered major defeats in the past, it never assumed such a pan-Kerala character. Because even in 2001, when the left lost considerably, lost substantially, the northern districts, the so-called party villages or the party bastions, remained with them. So that has not happened now. Even those bastions have fallen. And some of the most interestingly, some of the bastions fell to party dissidents, the CPIM dissidents. That also is something new. For instance, constituency like Taliparamba in Kannur, which is supposed to be the bastion of communists, which is where the Communist Party was born. Taliparamba and Payanur, 2 constituencies where the CPM has never lost in its history. This not just CPM lost there, but it is the CPM dissidents who were in the party for a long time, who fell out from the party leadership for some different reasons, and then fought with the support of the UDF that they won these seats. And another constituency in North Kerala, in Kasaragod, Trikkaripur, which has also never witnessed a left candidate losing, and a seat where stalwarts like E.K. Nayanar and other leaders won. This particular seat, the so-called CPM bastion, was won this time by a person called Sandeep Walia, who actually was a hardcore BJP person until recently, who joined the Congress recently, and he doesn't belong to that place either. And he won Trikkaripur. And the most symbolic of this apocalypse is happened in Dharmadam, which is Pinarayi Vijayan's seat, where again CPM has never lost. In Dharmadam, Pinarayi Vijayan was trailing in Dharmadam until the 6th round of counting was on. So imagine, this is the dimension of the defeat that the LDF has endured this time. And so now the reasons. Most of the reasons have been discussed in detail by now. Most important is the anti-incumbency, and everybody thought that the UDF definitely had an edge. but nobody expected such a tsunami. So most important reason definitely is the anti-incumbency sentiment. And Kerala is known for its Kerala voter, is particularly known for this, his penchant for anti-incumbency. There is alternating always after 5 years. The UDF wins and comes to power in 5 years of time. It's voted out. This has happened ever since Kerala elections began. But only twice this pattern was broken. One was in 1977, far away. It was in the aftermath of emergency. And the latest was in 2021, when Pinarayi Vijayan-led LDF was voted again to power for the second time in a row, which was unprecedented, which was also in unprecedented circumstances. Like the emergency in 1977, this was pandemic time. So anti-incumbency is something which is inborn, which looks inborn in Kerala to the Kerala voter. And so I think this particular trait asserted itself again is what something you say. So this fact, and this time it became so strong because for the first time the LDF was in power for continuously for 10 years. So this is something which is absolutely certain that this was the most important reason. This voter fatigue was very clear. Secondly, the minority consolidation behind the UDF, which was very clear. So especially among Muslims and the North Kerala, especially, those constituencies which I mentioned as some of them were CPM bastions, and most of the constituencies where the Muslim community formed 25% or more than that, almost all of them, the CPM, the LDF lost. And this has been the case, not that Muslim consolidation alone was a major factor, because you see this trend across Kerala, even in central Kerala and South Kerala, where the Muslims do not enjoy a major presence. But the defeat, the gravity or the weight of defeat in terms of margins, etc., was so conspicuous in North Kerala, where the Muslims were dominant. So why this Muslim consolidation? It has its own reasons. Most important is the LDF's direct confrontation with the Muslim League, because Muslim League happens to be the most important constituent in UDF. Even though Congress leads, only Muslim League has this completely assured kitty of seats. So targeting Muslim League has been a strategic decision by the CPM. So Muslim League very intelligently portrayed the entire thing or framed the entire thing as an anti-Muslim attitude of the CPM, not the anti-Muslim League thing. So besides Muslim League, for the first time, the UDF and the Muslim League had entered into an alliance with Jamaat Islami, in spite of the major differences that the Muslim League has with the Jamaat Islami, traditionally has with the Jamaat Islami, or even the clergy groups attached to the Muslim League, which also has its differences. But all these differences were forgotten for coming together against the CPM and the left. And definitely a number of actions and number of steps that the left, the CPM, took also led to this kind of image of being anti-Muslim. And one of them was the so-called soft Hindu measures that the CPM undertook after it realized that a large section of Hindu votes were actually eroding from them towards the BJP. So this led the CPM for the first time to have alliances or some kind of dealings with Hindu caste groups, which were notorious for their Islamophobic stances in the past. For instance, the most important caste organization was of the Elavas, who is the largest Hindu caste and which has traditionally been the backbone of the left. But the general secretary of that particular community caste organization, Mr. Vellapalli Nadeshan, he has been bad-mouthing the Muslim community for a long time. In spite of that, the left did not have any qualms to have direct, cordial relationship with this man, and never even once, asking him to withdraw his statements against the Muslim League or the Muslim community. And Pinarayi Vijayan particularly, who has a record of having stood against all kinds of communalism in the past, was eloquently cordial and soft towards Vellapalli Nadeshan, which was actually shocking to many people. And the holding of the global Ayyappa Sangam, Lord, the conference of devotees of Ayyappas in Shabarimala also actually backfired. It was an attempt to sort of check the erosion of Hindu votes towards the saffron. But what happened was that also created or gave an image of being soft Hindu for the CPM. And this particular conference, even the greetings of somebody like the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister, Yogi Adityanath, was read out by the CPM, a CPM minister, which actually sort of fueled the allegations that the CPM was taking a completely pro-Hindu stand in this. But this was a desperate attempt by the CPM to check, the erosion of Hindu votes from them to the BJP. But finally, it did not gain Hindu votes, but it alienated the Muslims further. So it was a double whammy for the CPM as such. And now, so if you take the performance, the other point, that if you take the performance of the government as such, I think the Pinarayi Vijayan government, both the first government and the second government, have done a good job. There's no complaint about the performance record in terms of infrastructure building or public investments in education and health and so many other things, and keeping this welfare state intact, all those things. So unlike Bhutta Babu in Bengal, Pinarayi Vijayan was particular that along with this infrastructure, the so-called neoliberal infrastructure expansion, this government should not sort of withdraw from public investing in public education, health, or protecting public sector institutions. All those were there. So it was not as if he was actually co-paying Buddhadev Bhattacharya in Bengal. So and corruption also, this government was far less in the sense that corruption, no minister in the government was tainted by any major corruption deed. But the problem happened in the democracy deficit in everyday functioning. The way government functioned, or the ministers functioned, or the chief minister function was completely out of touch with democratic ways. The arrogance, intolerance, and Pinarayi symbolized all those things. So these became a major point of campaign for the LDF, especially in times of television and social media. All these so-called hubris and arrogance and this kind of attitudes became extremely negative for the government in general and Pinarayi in particular, which combined to bring about this huge sort of debacle for the LDF. That is what I believe. And since I am being shown that I am already running short of time, I would like to conclude here.
Thank you, Mr. Radhakrishnan, for that historical perspective, as well as dwelling on the the weaknesses of the LDF and why they might have lost the election. I think we have exactly half an hour for discussion, and the audience, can please send in questions in the Q&A box. I see one or two already coming in, but while the audience sends in their questions, I had maybe a question each for each of the panelists, and maybe I'll go to Narayan first. And of course, the others are, I'm more than happy if others step in too. But Narayan, I had a specific question on, of course, the causes of, Vijay's quite extraordinary, the numbers that he won is already being discussed, the youth vote, desire for change, etc. But in terms of agenda, what do you think that he brings on the table that is, different from what the DMK and ADMK might do? Of course, you already mentioned, and I've been seeing this on news reports too, that Stalin actually had nursed his constituency quite well in Kolatho, right? But as you said, despite that, he lost. And so, what does because there seems to be very little there in the public domain on what Vijay really stands for. And that also kind of ties into an idea that you mentioned about soft authoritarianism, right?
Yeah.
And we know historically, if you look at Jayalalitha, MGR, etc., there is that sort of veil of secrecy, especially around people like Jayalalitha. They don't talk to people. Do you see a little bit of that in Vijay too? Because I've been hearing that he rarely talks to or has at least up till now talked to reporters, etc. So yeah, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Ranjay. The parallels that come to mind actually go back to my experience in the US, where on two fronts there is a sort of a connection to the Vijay phenomenon. One is, I was told by many scholars of American elections that Americans vote not on issues but on personalities. And the other is, with regard to watching the election of Trump himself, it was almost as if you didn't exactly have a terrible amount of frustration with the status quo, but the sheer lack of change or the lack of alternatives from the mainstream governance paradigm has made a new generation or brand of voter gravitate towards something which could only be characterized as maverick or rebellious, but not necessarily coherent from a social science standpoint, where you ask rational questions about policy agendas, implementation, institutionalization, and the history of the development of any party. And instead, you focus absolutely only on the personality, and you want someone who's radically different from what has been in power for many years, to the point where it's like throwing they describe Trump as voters his supporters wanting to throw a grenade at Washington because of the amount of stalemate that you saw in Congress. So I think a similar thing could be said of the Dravidian majors, that is the DMK and the ADMK, in the sense that while they had their own differences, and I would highlight what scholar Narendra Subramanian talks about in the sense of the DMK was built on a base of what is called assertive populism, which was about bringing subaltern groups such as the lower and middle castes under the umbrella of the anti-Hindi, anti-North, anti-Hindu, anti-caste movements. They were all kind of under the same rubric, and the AIADMK came under the sort of broad category of paternalist populism, where it was not so much about pushing back on any dominant elites, but more about a sort of a benevolent, a benefactor of the kind that MG Ramachandran portrayed himself to be originally in his propagandistic films, but then also manifested the same role when he became chief minister, in the sense of having a rainbow coalition of castes, including wide number of lower caste groups, counting women among their supporters, Dalits, but also a few oddly placed upper caste groups within the same umbrella. So whether DMK or ADMK practicing either brand of populism, it looked like they were broadly pushing the same wine in a slightly differentiated labels. So they were talking about Dravidian exceptionalism or Tamil exceptionalism in the context of having to fight for state autonomy against an overweening political establishment in Delhi. Of course, they realized when they moved from their radical phase to a more moderate phase that the Indian nation state itself was giving between the central governments, the central list and the state list and the concurrent list, and the division of power between the civilian and the military. the government in Delhi retained overwhelming power to hold the nation state together. When that realization dawned upon the Dravidian leaders, they moderated the movement itself to become far less assertive and more about bringing together more of these subaltern groups to present a unified voice against Delhi's sort of pushback. So, but that formula, our core argument is beginning to seem old, especially when the likes of the BJP were beginning to assert themselves, and the RSS was conducting, temple rituals and village functions across the state in a quiet way, but with a view possibly of having a 20 to 100-year plan of coming to power in Tamil Nadu. So there's a sense of the old model of Dravidianism was no longer adapting rapidly enough to confront this challenge. That's the first thread. The second is that as I said, not only, and you also alluded, Ronojoy, is not only that were the youth drawn to viral marketing campaigns and drawn to a cinema star with a sort of a maverick reputation, but they were also removed from the original founding values and ideals that their fathers, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers were talking about. So for them, they are the gig workers. They are the factory floor apprentices. They are the ones working in small, medium, and micro enterprises. And if you walk into a mall in Chennai, they are the ones in the service sector. They're manning the counters. So these people no longer are fired up by that old school rhetoric and instead lean towards any leader who could provide, whether in reality or only in name, ideas on how to deal with very real challenges happening to the workforce, the shocks coming from abroad, whether AI or the war in West Asia, or all of those impacts felt on our shores and on Tamil Nadu's economy. They care much more about those issues than the old formula issues of Hindi imposition and so on. So I believe that has led to this dramatic win for Vijay, even perhaps one that he was surprised by the extent of, is my suspicion.
Right. Thanks, Narayan. I've quite a few questions in London, but I'll just restrict myself to a couple. One is you did mention the SIR and also the need to go beyond just the numbers, right? But have we still been able to, I know it's early days, the election has just been held, been able to actually gauge the extent to which SIR had, the impact it had, not just on the act of voting, but, in general, as you mentioned, in terms of, neighbors, seeing, the Hindu neighbor, seeing a, Muslim, being, not getting to vote, etc. So the impact of the SIR, if you could speak a little bit about that. And second, there's a question that's coming now about, that's for you, maybe you can view it in the Q&A. It's about, the effects of, the specific question is of the effects of the ED raid on the IPAC office and whether that had a kind of last minute impact. As we know, the IPAC chief was actually let out on bail as soon as the election ended, which was kind of unusual. But and to just expand that question on IPAC and sort of tying it in with this idea that Dwaipan has put forward regarding this franchisee politics, or franchisee model. What role did sort of the IPAC play in both in the TMC's sort of presence on the ground, and how did that sort of hurt the TMC in this election, or maybe even over time? If you could just address these couple of issues. Yeah, I think you're on.
So thank you for those questions. I mean, there are a number of directions to go, and I'm happy to sort of answer any questions. So maybe first, just to very quickly on the SIR numbers. So let me tell you a little bit, my stats hat on for a second. The mistake that most of the popular analysis is making on counting is that they're trying to understand a one-for-one change. So if 10,000 voters were removed from the voting list, was the gap between the BJP and the TMC less than 10,000 something? But as we just said, the net impact of SIR is two things. So one, I mentioned polarization. The other, arguably, is a much stronger impact. So let me just sort of give a sense of what biased deletion, demographically or strategically placed deletion can do. Let's imagine for a second that there are two coalitions that are equally powerful. Okay, A and B, Hindu and Muslim, whatever you want to say. Okay, TMC and BJP. Now I'm going to strategically cut a few people from TMC, but nobody from BJP. There are large mass of floating voters here. You go from evenly matched to quite a bit stronger on this side. And so a set of voters will shift to this side. This is actually very normal for those of us who study electoral politics. The key impact of deletion in certain areas, particularly Muslim areas, is to fundamentally also alter the balance of power between Hindus and Muslims in one context after another, which also fundamentally shifts then how strategic voters move here, there, and everywhere. So if we have polarization effects, we have power balance effects, we have a bunch of other effects that we can think about intersecting with the state. Just as we did during COVID, you shouldn't be doing these one-for-one kind of analyses. You should be doing some version of all, just as we used to do this all-cause mortality. During COVID, how many people died? Much more during COVID. We should be doing some version of all-cause impact of SIR deletion, right? So I'm less interested in, if 10 more people were deleted, is the gap 10 voters more or less? What is the aggregate electoral impact of deleting 10 more voters? And I can tell you that from just some brief analysis, not that I've done, others have done, right? It does look to be a very, very significant impact. One that would have drawn the election much closer. And that's just a seat-by-seat analysis. I think if you look at overall polarization effects and so on and so forth, who would have won, who would have lost is a matter of ideology at this point, it seems. But I think we can very safely say that the impact is very, very large in terms of the number of seats that we won for the BJP. Okay, so now very quickly on IPAC. So just to take a step back, what was IPAC doing within the TMC? So what is understood in the part of the story I didn't get into because it's a little bit of inside baseball. Mamata Banerjee is associated as the charismatic face, the person who started the TMC. There is a process of handover that has been going on to her nephew, Abhishek Banerjee. Now, Abhishek Banerjee was he was in many ways the Amit Shah of the party, the organizational man. And his way of generating power was to create parallel structures and ways of managing factions that may not necessarily have been loyal to him. One of the most major factions, as we now know, is led by Subhendu Adhikari, who became, a leader of the BJP. So IPAC played a critical role in allowing Abhishek Banerjee to manage the party as a whole and all of these disparate franchises and factions and so on and so forth. Now, it also did one other thing, right? Which is that because what is being signed off by IPAC is at the top, it meant that when it came to messaging, social media campaigns, everything, things were much, much more coordinated. So the net impact of putting financial pressure and then eventually raiding IPAC was to lose that coordination mechanism. I was telling somebody who was jokingly telling me, and I think, in many ways it's the most apparent way in which the IPAC mattered. So if you were looking at videos that were coming out from the TMC and Mamata Banerjee directly on counting day saying that, the state is taken over, counting is not going properly, most 15-year-olds would make a better looking video than the videos that were being put out. Right? That is not something that would have happened with IPAC. You could see a complete collapse of the media management that the IPAC was associated with. Now, how much of that is due to IPAC having gone away or other collapses, we cannot say. But that structural centralization of managing what the cadre is doing, managing perception and media, that clearly seems to have broken by.
Right. Thanks, Nanjan. Maybe more questions are coming in, so maybe I'll shelve my question and maybe direct one of the audience questions. It might be visible to the panelists. One for Sangeeta, where the question is, how do the elections affect Himanta Biswa Sarma's position within the BJP? And that's something that's this whole question of hierarchy and succession within the BJP is something that one gets asked about a lot outside of India. Incidentally, that's one thing. And I just wanted to tag on another thing. You did mention, towards the end of your comments, the question of subnationalism. And where do you think parties like the Assam Gana Parishad stand now? Of course I know they are part of the BJP alliance, but where do you see them sort of going? Have they been kind of slowly getting amalgamated into the BJP and its politics, or do they have a distinct identity at all?
Thank you. First, I'll take up the Himanta question. I don't see, the BJP taking any different leadership, route after this massive win. I think it'll really it has really helped him to come back for the second term. And one other thing what I noticed was that just after the election results came out, he went personally to visit Sarbanan Sonowal, his most important adversary, I would say, or contender for that post. So, and he is a minister for shipping it, Modi government. And so he reached out there, and he was, media was called there, and, he came out and gave a bite, so it's like so he in a way said that, he's an elder and I'll just come to visit him, and, he's in control. So that is something I think he did before these central leadership could lend to decide things, because the general news in Assam is that Prime Minister would be coming for the swearing in. So this is something that we see. And one other reason that he is not likely to change is also because he is quite a New Delhi's man, which Sonowal was not quite. Even though he was a BJP chief minister, he was come from the Jatiyotapad, the sub-nationalist background. He was an ASU president, and also with Assam Gana Parishad. Then he moved to BJP. So when the CAA was brought in, he was not very happy about it, and because his whole politics was under question. But that was not a problem for Sharma. So I think that is where I see that he is quite New Delhi's man, and he's not going to change. Initially, when Sonowal was there, we all were thinking that the Assam, because it has the population is such that a tribal would continue to be a chief minister, like Sonowal is the tribal from the Sonowal Kosari community, but he was not made, and for the first time a Brahmin chief minister was given to Assam. So that had its repercussion. I saw a bit of undercurrents also in Upper Assam, that because the Ahom community, which is the largest community, were feeling a bit left out. Tarun Gogoi was from the Ahom community, and this time it was a big factor in Assam, in Upper Assam, coming together of three Gogois: Akhil Gogoi of Raijor Dol, Lurin Jyoti Gogoi of Assam Jatiya Parishad, and Gaurav Gogoi from Congress. So it was a big assertion, I would say, from the Ahom community, but only Akhil could manage to win from Sibsagar, and the other two lost. So it also then talks about the sub-nationalist politics, the trajectory. So where we see that we have to first then talk about Assam Gana Parishad, because this was the first a political party that was formed immediately after the signing of the Assam Accord in 1985. directly born of that anti-foreigner movement. But we gradually saw it going closer to BJP, and of course during CAA it came out also for a little while, but then went back. But in 2021 elections, we saw it winning only 6 seats, and then everybody was writing it off as like, it's the beginning of the end, because BJP, when we see it's how it behaves elsewhere also with Shiv Sena, it would tie up with Shiv Sena and then eat away its voter base. It has done, so many examples are there. So AGP also was going through that phase. But this time, strangely, I see that its tally has gone up to 10. So it's and that has happened significantly after the birth of 2 sub-nationalist parties, Raija Dol and AJP, both born of the anti-CAA protest of that movement. So, and then the leader of AJP, this is the 3rd election he has lost, and he's a very popular figure. He's not compromising with the BJP. Lurin Jutikogo I'm talking about. This is the 3rd election he has lost. But Raija Dol could manage to win last elections, only one, the president won, because he was also arrested at that time under UAPA. He contested from behind bars. So, and he won. And this time we saw him winning, not just his seat, but one other person has won. So Raija Dol has been able to successfully go from 1 to 2, but not AJP. But we saw that same thing being helped out, I think perhaps for AGP is now something that perhaps the BJP needs, and it's not the others. So I look at that it's being really helped out by the ruling party also to remain as a factor, because in Assam the subnationalist politics is still very strong. So it does have a space for a political party which is hinged on subnationalism. But AGP, if you look at the ground, is not at all a popular party. So this time 10 seats it won, but most of the seats it won are from the Muslim constituencies. So the tickets given were to the Muslims, because that is something where BJP has no heft. So I think that is what it would bring to the table more, and that is something that I see. And before I end, I just want to highlight this, that in Gujarat also we have seen that Gujarati Ashmita or sub-nationalism is the Hindu Ashmita now. And if you see that in Marathi, Manush and all that is now a very Hindu Manush. So in Assam also, Assamese Jatiyatavadi has never been hinged on religion. If you look at even the songs of Bhupen Hazarika or others, it's always on Assamese community together. That's why the anti-CAA protests were also against religion. They're equally opposed to the Bengali Hindus and the Muslims. But we are gradually beginning to see, with the rise of AGP, the Jatiyotabad sentiments or the subnational sentiments in Assam is also gradually veering towards that Hindu Jatiyotabad. So this for me is a very interesting election that way also, that AGP, which is with BJP, is now again kind of a revivalism that we are seeing.
Thank you, Sangeeta. There's a question for Mr. Radhakrishnan from my former colleague, Robin Jeffrey. The question is, did any of the old print newspapers and their online voices, what role did they play in the election? And did any other paper other than Deshabhimani support the LDF?
Yeah. Well, no. The mainstream newspapers in Kerala, as Dr. Jeffrey knows so well, has been generally anti-left always. And right from 1957, the notorious liberation struggle saw that all the newspapers coming together to oppose the left government, the first communist government under EMS Namboodiripad. And so that trend has continued even to date. But what has changed is the emergence of social media. So after the emergence of social media, some kind of democratization has happened in spite of all the the problems that the social media brought about. There has been a democratization in terms of pluralism and other things. So the other voices also began to be heard, and other arguments have been heard since this. But the media has been, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, the media has been viscerally hostile to most of the media, not talking the mainstream media, opposed to the Pinarayi Vijayan government. And and there has not been any major attempt either by the government or by the party to to sort of address this particular issue. So they failed miserably in messaging, political messaging, or communicating. Because earlier times they had their own parallel systems of communication, like the party meetings or the party classes or the other kinds of things. But now we are talking about where the television and the social media completely dominating the public sphere. That particular parallel channel which the left used to have to counter the mainstream propaganda almost died out for various reasons. So I think that generally the left had a pretty bad sort of situation as far as media was concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Radhakrishnan. We don't have too much time, and there are a few more questions that have come in. Some general, and a couple actually directed to Nilanjan, if you can very quickly answer. One is, of course, the age-old question of political violence in Bengal, something that we have privately discussed on several occasions. Why is Bengal supposedly more politically, violent than other states? And wasn't that precisely the reason why, the question asked, why central forces were needed in a big way? And there's another longer question. I don't know, Nilanjan, whether you can see it in the Q&A box, right? It's fairly lengthy, but I guess the question is about social engineering and whether the BJP was able to attract, sort of more marginalized Hindus, which in a way might have, which they've done, of course, successfully in other parts of the country, whether that led to the greater sort of Hindu consolidation. Nilanjan, would you like to tackle that first? And then I'll throw out the more general questions to all the panelists.
Okay, yeah, I think let me just go, I know we're actually very short on time, so let me just go very, very quickly. So I do think that we should not give a free pass to the TMC scatter the kind of local violence that it had brought on the system, the CPM before it. Obviously, that was a large part of understanding the politics of Bengal. In practice, the counterfactual we would want is that parties don't engage in violence. They have the mobilization capacity that they normally have. And then you would see where the chips fall, right? That would be a very good democratic outcome. The problem with analyzing that way of thinking is that if you bring in a paramilitary force that is seen as siding with one political party that conducts preventative detention, you, of course, do away with the violence making that TMC was involved with, but you also do away with the standard mobilization that TMC was involved with. I think what would have been very helpful to develop some more trust in what was done is that if afterwards the paramilitary had taken a very strong line and stamped out all post-poll violence, no matter who was doing it, not allowing bulldozers to go around. I mean, you might not be able to prevent one person from showing up to another person's room and killing somebody. You can prevent a bulldozer from going into a bunch of buildings in Newmarket, right? So when the paramilitary failed to step in that case, then I think the average person on the ground, even the average BJP supporter on the ground, doesn't feel like the paramilitary was seen as a solution to violence in general, but was seen as a solution to the BJP's problem in particular. Now, very quickly on, the kind of social engineering the BJP may have done and sort of other issues. I think one thing that we observed in both 21 and 24 is the TMC was facing very, very significant anti-incumbency even then. So the question is sort of what changed this time? You say empirically, it's actually not the lower caste Hindus that changed this time. It's the upper caste Hindus that changed this time, right? As I showed you the map, the urban area, the belt around Calcutta isn't just Dalits, right? It is, a lot of other, in some sense, the Bhadraloks also voted with the BJP this time, and it hadn't happened to such a great extent before. So I do think that, in some sense, the BJP was seduced by the idea of subaltern Hindutva, but it may have been actually why they lost in 2021. They realized actually they should just mobilize all Hindus and they have a better chance of winning. which is sort of what happened in 2026. Now, just very quickly, what does that say about Muslim politics, and what does that say about a Hindu civilizational state? To take one other question on, I completely agree with Sangeeta. The true manifestation of Hindu politics today is what has been done in Assam and what is being done in the East. People say UP. The real Hindu state model is what is being done in the East today, right? Where you have very, very large minorities of Muslims who still cannot be represented and get disenfranchised. And it's a question as to the extent to which this will continue. Just very quickly on this, we don't think about the BJP as political scientists as genuine and ideological party. We think of them as an ethnic party. The distinction is the following. If you have two peoples that say exactly the same thing, and somebody says, I'm voting for the Hindu or the Muslim, then I'm voting for a person for their identity, not for their ideas, right? And I think that this is sort of what you're seeing. You're seeing more an othering of Muslims, as opposed to any kind of deep understanding of what Ram Rajya might mean or what a Hindu civilizational state might mean. And so you see a lot of these kinds of rules of bringing in the police, bringing in CA in a fairly haphazard way. It's not obvious how they fit into one larger imagination of a Hindu state. It's just an othering. And that's sort of where I think.
Yeah, thanks, Nilanjan. So you answered actually one of the questions that was more general about the civilization state, etc. And we are really running out of time. So maybe I'll just throw out, one last question, before we conclude. Maybe we can just take a couple of minutes extra. Is how do these election results improve or worsen the prospects of unified opposition in future, especially looking ahead to the 2029 elections, which is of course some time away? If any of the panelists want to take a stab at that, the prospects of unified.
I'm happy to go.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm going. Yeah.
So what's happened in Tamil Nadu, as I alluded a few times, is certainly deep in the sense of, modifying the calculus of the Dravidian movement as it stood today, as it stands today, as it always. Sorry, there's some other noise. It always was a movement that sought to accommodate an ever wider group of castes and subcastes within it, in order to remain a stable entity, and one that could answer the challenges coming from outside the state in terms of fighting for Tamil Nadu state autonomy. What has happened now in the victory of the TVK and the relegation of the DMK to second place and the ADMK to third place is that new modes of political functioning have been prioritized. New political ambitions have come to the fore, and this idea of moving from personality-based politics to performative politics, while it appeared to be a positive development in the aftermath of the passing of Jayalalitha and Karunanidhi, appears to have taken a U-turn of sorts, in the sense that in retreating to Vijay, whether driven by the youth and women voters or by any other cohorts, it marks the movement to an political entity and a political paradigm which is personality-based sans ideology or sans programmatic momentum. So the DMK and ADMK, for all the faults of their leadership, failing to nurture the rest of the cadre and so forth, at least were firmly rooted in and guided by the prevailing Dravidian ideologies, sort of ideals and values. As Ranujai pointed out in the beginning, it's still unclear to most of us what values and ideals guide or drive Vijay today. Is there a prospect that he may swing over to the BJP's view of the world? Is it purely about adulation of a film star and it's his own ego alone that will determine which policy directions he takes? Or is it going to be something as mundane as, the bureaucracy will take charge and set the agenda and he will just sit back and watch? And of course, all of this assuming that the DMK and ADMK don't come together and upend the entire plan that the TVK has made. So whether through fragmentation of the actual political formations and the reduction of their strength as a representative voice in the state, or whether as a body blow to the momentum of Dravidian politics as such, driven by the two major parties, I do feel there's a weakening of the federalism impulse within the state, and the fact that within southern states, Tamil Nadu was considered to be one of the final bastions answering the call for homogenization of culture and the one nation, one election, and so many other unifying traits being pushed across the nation from New Delhi.
Unfortunately, we've really run out of time. We actually gone 5 minutes over. I think it was Mr. Radhakrishnan who had mentioned that the India alliance is sort of dead, given the what we saw in the elections. The opposition, of course, does need to reimagine its politics, which is, of course, easier said than done, given the dominance of the BJP now across wide swaths of the country. So on that note, unfortunately, we could have gone on, but we'll have to stop here. Thanks to all the panelists for taking out the time for the discussion, and thanks to the audience or parts of the audience that have still kind of hung on. So could we just have a virtual round of applause for the panelists, and thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Take it. Bye-bye.